In Chapter 20, we are introduced to the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, which was passed in 1935, and we learn about the three major pieces of legislation that govern labor and management relations today: the Wagner Act of 1935, the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, and the Landrum-Griffin Act of 1957, which is also called the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. The Wagner Act guarantees the rights of workers to organize and bargain collectively and forbids employers from engaging in specified unfair labor practices. The Taft-Hartley Act, which was from 1947, bars unions from engaging in specified unfair labor practices, makes collective bargaining agreements enforceable in the U.S. district courts, and provides civil damage remedies for parties injured by certain prohibited union activities. And the Landrum-Griffin Act from 1957 governs all internal operations of labor unions. So it requires certain financial disclosures of those unions. This chapter was filled with a lot of information regarding unions and the labor organization. This is not information, while I've obviously heard about unions and have some limited experience or knowledge really about unions, this was a tremendous amount of information and things that I really never realized, and certainly would be important depending on the institution for which you end up being employed by. The possibility, of unions being introduced into a workplace, and the requirements of the employees in order to be interested in that kind of representation, and the responsibility of the employers as far as allowing unions or working with unions as they may be coming into the workplace. A lot of those steps and information is not information that I was familiar with, and some of it I found very surprising, as far as the unfair labor practices and what may be viewed as unfair labor practices. Some of it seems obvious, but other things, such as the employer actually recognizing a union, could be perceived in a negative way, as well as them not recognizing a union. And so where I think primarily the possibility may exist for multiple unions to be interested in the ability to represent the employees, it would be an unfair practice for the employer to acknowledge one union over another without all of that voting that needs to take place as far as representation for the workers is concerned. Making sure that the workers that are represented through certain unions are that those unions are really looking out for the best interest of all those employees, so that they have similar responsibilities, are paid similarly, all of those types of things. I think really just a lot of information that I had been unfamiliar with. So I found this chapter in particular lots of note taking, because it just a lot of information that I had not previously really been informed about or dove into. I think that when the chapter talked about strikes And one of the things that actually struck me as interesting was in regards to the economic strike, and that employers are allowed to fill those strikers' jobs while the strike is taking place. However, if permanent replacements are hired, the strikers are not entitled to return to their jobs. So I would think that that's not something that I had ever heard of before. And I would think that that certainly would get the people of those particular unions to perhaps think carefully about actually going on strike, because you could be without a job if permanent replacements are hired under those circumstances. The chapter, it also talks about what unlawful strikes are, and the information that surrounds that. I had heard about wildcat strikes previously, which certainly are a violation of collective bargaining agreements. And then the chapter kind of ended with the boycotts, picketing, um, and regarding picketing, there's various levels of picketing, which again was something I was not familiar with. Well, obviously I have seen people picketing. I didn't know that there was certain different levels, I guess, of picketing, or different areas of picketing. So I thought, that the informational, jurisdictional, and organizational / recognitional picketing, I didn't realize that there were various differences. So overall, I found this chapter very informative, a lot of information to process, and certainly I think it made me conscious of the work involved, especially on the part of an employer, to be sure that they are adhering to um, the requirements as far as unfair labor practices are concerned, making sure that they're following through, doing exactly what they need to be doing, and being very cautious, because even if perhaps they thought they were trying to do the right thing, they could still be doing the wrong thing. So I certainly feel that, having a specialist, somebody who sort of specializes or is extremely knowledgeable about the requirements for handling and dealing, communicating in union situations, would be extremely beneficial for an employer to have, to be sure that all of those protocols are being followed, and that you're not stepping out of line and trying to negotiate or provide information. I think the idea of unions coming into perhaps a previous non-union business or a non-union shop can certainly raise emotions and concerns for probably all parties involved on some level, and making sure that everybody has all of the information that is necessary to make the appropriate decision for him or herself, and for the employer to make sure that they have all of the information that they need to be sure that they are following through as they need, without leaving themselves vulnerable or liable in any kind of situation.